Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft & Tailored, and in this episode of What Is On My Wrist, we are talking about a Rolex 5512 no-date Submariner from 1962, and this one is very special, has a lot of things that we can dive into and talk about. This is a Gilt Chapter ring exclamation bicolor text pointed crown guard. I know, it's a mouthful. Let me break it down. Let me explain that for you. So let's first talk about pointed crown guards. Basically, after the little crown and the big crown sub, Rolex decided to protect the crown of their dive watch. And the way that they did that is they came up with this essentially extension of the case to protect the crown. The reason why they did that is the crown is one of the weakest points of a watch in terms of water vulnerability. So if you knocked your crown, let's say on a barnacle, piece of coral, whatever. The first version of their crown protection guard device, or crown guard, was essentially what they call a square shoulders or square crown guards, and these are very, very rare. These are very early, they are very sought after, and we're talking about watches that are really, you know, for good examples, in the $250,000 range, no joke. They're very, very rare. But Rolex found that the divers, when they had gloves on, it was hard for them to actually set the timer or operate the crown. So they kind of naturally progressed to what we see today, which are kind of like the nubby crown guards or the standard crown guards, which is kind of an in-between between a square crown guard and a pointed crown guard. So what's interesting is we have a gilt dial. So gilt dials are basically dials that are glossy, but also have luminous material directly applied to the dial. The other thing that's very interesting is the text is this gilted color. So gilt means gold. The hands are also, in this example, a little bit more oxidized, but typically they'll be like a very gold or bright gold coloration, which kind of accents the text. What's interesting about this specific example is we have two colors of text on the dial. So we have the Submariner as well as the depth rating in this gilted color. And we have somebody honking a horn out there. We are in our headquarters here in Los Angeles, California. And we also have this silver printed text for the COSC rating. So the reason why this is interesting is pre-1962, 5512s actually had two lines of text on the dial. So I know this is confusing. You might see a guy wearing a 5512 that only has two lines of text on the dial, and that is actually correct and accurate because up until 1962, or up until the release of the 5513 Submariner, 5512s only had two lines of text on the dial, which would be Submariner for model name, and then the depth rating. But in 62, Rolex being a very resourceful company, they had dials that were basically left over from the 5512, and they put the two-line dials into the 5513s and then designated 5512s with an extra screening or printing of the COSC rating at the 6 o'clock position on the dial. So it's really, really striking. What makes this one specifically even more rare, I know, I'm not done yet, is that there's an exclamation point on the bottom portion of the dial. So right above the 6 o'clock marker, the nickname exclamation comes because there's a little lume dot that is at the bottom of the dial. So why is that lume dot there? Well, in 1960, the Atomic Energy Commission was basically putting a ban on a lot of radioactive materials. And up until 1960, 1961, Rolex was luming their dials, if that's a word, luming the dials with radium lume, which is highly radioactive. Not good for your health at the time, a lot of regulations, and also I think in 59, 1960, Cold War, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it actually made things quite difficult to put radium on the dials of these watches. But again, Rolex being a very resourceful company, remember now how they're using both of these dials for the 5513 and the 5512. They basically had a lot of Swiss-only dials that were not lumed with radium, and they basically designated these dials to be lumed with tritium. And the way that they showed that designation that it was a non-radioactive dial is basically by putting a little exclamation point on the dial, and then they moved into what we would call the underline dial. So there's also dials that have underlines either under Rolex Oyster Perpetual or above the depth rating on the dial. So we can show you some examples of those as well. But the early variants that basically have Swiss only dials within a very specific time period, 61 to 62, will have this exclamation point on the bottom of the dial, which is also another key characteristic and also very rare because we're talking about probably about a year of production for an exclamation dial. And we'll see that across the entire reference range for anything that has lume on the dial. It's also gilt chapter ring. So chapter ring basically means that the minute track is enclosed in a ring. Bicolor text on the dial, pointed crown guard, and it's exclamation dial. It's just insane. The watch is unpolished. It is a true survivor. I would call this definitely a time capsule piece. Even down to the bracelet. The bracelet is dated 62, fourth quarter of 62. So everything about this watch is correct and is right. And it's very hard to find watches like this today. To find a watch like this that is in unpolished condition with a no joke, mirrored glossy gilt dial is very, very hard to find. Most of these watches like this reside in collections and they're not coming out. And on top of that, the lume on this dial is flawless. There isn't any degradation. There isn't any cracking or crumbling. Gilt dials have kind of like this dome shape to the lume that was applied to the glossy kind of lacquer. And in some cases that lume will either degrade or flake off, or if the dial's been removed from the case during a service and placed upside down, it is probably not even joking around, it's the nicest 5512 that I've ever seen and had in our extended collection. It is downright stunning. This watch is available for sale. I will provide a link below so you guys can get into the details, but on the wrist, it wears wonderfully. I have really fallen hard, I would say, in the past 2 to 3 years for gilt dials, especially good ones. It's kind of easy to find tropical or spider or kind of, degraded gilt dials. But it's even harder to find a gilt dial that is in pristine and mint condition. Even under ultraviolet light, I mean, everything hits properly. It is just spectacular. So we'll provide a link in the description below so that you guys can check this out. Watch like this is going to be in the $80,000 range. Without question. So be sure to check this one out. Also do us a favor, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That seriously helps us out. Be sure to follow us on Instagram. We'll provide a link below. And also check us out online at craftandtailor.com to check out this watch and many others like it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.